and all of that. It's
Yeah.
gonna be good. It's good though.
Yes. Well, congratulations on your position. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you. I
you for
appreciate it.
stepping up and taking care of us like that, because we could have gotten somebody else and we have you. And that means some amazing
And,
things are in store for us because there's a
and we are live right now. I just want to interrupt you guys
So,
real quick just to
just
say
thank
hello to the folks that are have already joined us. My name's Albert Lee. I'm here with Akasha Spence, Teressa Raiford, Asukulu, Songolo. We're here to talk about what's going on in Portland, but we're going to just chit chat for a couple minutes while people get online. And so continue away. I know it's just nuts with this whole COVID crisis. We can't all be getting together, but at least with the miracle of technology, we can get together here. So how y'all doing?
Doing great.
We're good. We're good. All things considered.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Asukulu?
I'm good. We just set up a COVID-19 relief fund for people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Nice.
Excellent. Excellent. What's been the impact there so far?
So they're just now receiving their first few cases. So the situation should get bad really quickly. And so we're hoping to raise $2,000, which is the equivalent of 3 million Congolese francs.
What's the buying power of that 3 million? Because sometimes it can be 3 million, but it's not. It has a buying power that's equivalent of like $500 or 2,000. What's the buying power?
So the buying power is pretty good. We have partners in Panzi, and so that would be able to supply their 150 team with masks, and then that would be able to supply them about 50 ventilators. And then we're still getting a few more numbers, but that's about what we know right now.
And when you say get them, where is it going to be? Like what city or what region of the country?
Yeah, so they're gonna have to get all of these things shipped from abroad because there's just not a huge production of these things within the Congo just because of the situation with the war and the conflict. And so that's why these things are going to be needing to be produced abroad and then distributed through shipping and things like that.
Yeah. Has the government come out with any stipulations or executive orders, the equivalent of an executive order saying people now have to stay home and things are going to start shutting down?
Yeah, churches and mass gatherings have been shut down. No meetings over 20 people, I believe, is the statement that was released. And then they're also trying to practice social distancing.
Yeah, I know here, especially with it being a huge holy day for both Christian and Jewish communities here. This is going to be something completely different here in Portland, across the country, and I can imagine in Congo as well. What is the kind of breakdown religiously in Congo?
It's predominantly Christian, with a majority of people being Catholic. Right now, they're not able to do mass or any public gatherings, so a lot of people are going to be celebrating from home, which is something that's not very usual there, but you got to do what you have to do.
Do you think people are going to be compliant, or is there going to be a lot of resistance to the declaration?
So a lot of people have been reliant in more middle income and higher income communities. For lower income people who work in mines and different lower income jobs, they rely on those like services and those jobs to continue. Currently, they're working on trying to strike and trying to get their essential work paid higher, but that's difficult with between negotiations with the local government and then the national government as well.
Right. It's all very similar.
Yeah. So we are about 5 minutes into the hour. I guess this would be a great time to start our Portland Town Hall. Asukulu is our moderator. And did you want to go ahead and sort of give us our overview?
Yeah, I'm very excited to be joined by three amazing candidates to talk about the COVID-19 crisis and how it relates to low-income communities, especially and specifically low-income communities of color. I'm joined by Representative Akasha Lawrence Spence, Teressa Raiford, candidate for Portland Mayor, and Albert Lee, candidate for Oregon Congress for District 3. So a little bit about the candidates. We'll let Representative Lawrence go first. Representative Lawrence is a small business owner and civic activist who is the Oregon State Representative for House District 36, containing much of West Portland. We are delighted to have Representative Lawrence with us today. Akasha, would you share a little bit about yourself and what work you are doing in your role?
Yeah, thank you, Asukulu. As he mentioned, my name is Akasha Lawrence Spence. I am the House Representative for House District 36, that is downtown Portland, all the way to the South Waterfront, including OHSU neighborhood, back all the way up to Northwest and Southwest Hills, all the way to Multnomah Village. And I am very honored and privileged to be able to serve over 65,000 constituents who live in that district. As a small business owner and a civic activist, I focus on strengthening our communities through ownership, ensuring that communities have the ability to control their resources, which makes them more resilient, self-sufficient, and dynamic. And that is something that I continue to do in the legislature and advocate for helping to fortify low-income homeowners, making sure that people have the access to the IDA program, which helps people to start small businesses or pursue secondary education or to save to buy a home. And so for me, everything that I do centers around economic justice because it's a pathway to civic engagement. It's a pathway to ensuring that our communities have the right health outcomes. It's a pathway to ensure that our schools are fully funded, et cetera. And so that's the work that I center on. Everything that I do has an economic justice lens and an equity lens, because that is the reason why our communities have been left behind. So again, thank you so much for having me here today and supporting two candidates who, understand that and are gonna fight for it.
Thank you, Akasha. Next, we'll have Albert Lee, who is a congressional candidate for the 3rd District of Oregon, endorsed by Our Revolution, Portland, Democratic Socialist Association, and Brand New Congress. Amongst almost a dozen others, we are delighted to have Mr. Albert Lee with us. Albert, would you share a little bit about yourself and why you are running?
Thank you. Thank you, Asukulu. Again, my name is Albert Lee, and I'm running to represent the people of the 3rd District of Oregon to Congress. I'm running because I believe, first of all, that democracy requires choice. It is something we haven't had in our district in over a generation. I am running because we face a series of crises here in this district, across the country and around the world, that require bold action now, not just inspirational and aspirational words. We have issues ranging from our homelessness crisis, the lack of affordable housing and living wages, and a climate emergency. I'm running because I believe in the basic premise of the Democratic Party when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's time that we uplift some new voices from some other backgrounds, from some other lived experiences, to represent us here in the most diverse district of our state. And I'm running because I think it's time that we end this oligarchy, this rule by elite multimillionaire career politicians, and replace them with citizen representatives who know the struggle, who won't take corporate contributions, and who will truly represent and fight for the people. Now, for me, I am a 6th-generation American and an immigrant at the same time. I was born in South Korea, where my African-American Army dad met my Korean mom during the Vietnam War. Grew up in working-class St. Louis, North County, St. Louis, next door to Ferguson. I'm a 1st-generation college grad, 1st-generation law school grad, served in the United States military, and have worked in a wide variety of different areas, including international trade, project management, law, and most recently, I was one of the deans at Portland Community College. So recently, I have stepped down from that position in order to take up this challenge, in order to truly have a representative that's going to work for all of us, who has a different perspective than what we typically find, which is folks that come from a very privileged background, from the 1%, from an area where they just don't necessarily have an understanding of the struggles and the needs of all of our citizens. So I'm making this run to represent all of the citizens of the 3rd District, and I look forward to earning everyone's vote on May 19th.
Thank you, Albert. That was amazing. Teressa Raiford is a candidate for mayor of the city of Portland. Teressa, is a Black Lives Matter activist and started Don't Shoot Portland, a local Portland nonprofit promoting police accountability and advocating for disenfranchised Oregonians. We're delighted to have Teressa. Would you be interested in sharing a bit about yourself and why you're running?
Absolutely. Thank you. And Albert, thanks again for having me on your program today. I'm very honored for this opportunity. And I just want to say, I was born in Portland. Both of my parents were born here. My grandfather, his mom, we go back 4 generations. And I've been a studier of time and history. And so a lot of what I study showed me what inequities mean and how they disturb communities, and how when you're a person of color in America, you have this opportunity through our education system to seek and to want to achieve an American dream. But there are so many inequities and so many political systems that work against us. And so a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, my nephew, he had just graduated from high school, and he was killed in downtown Portland in gun violence right on Northwest 2nd and Cooch. And it broke my heart, because I had came home to visit, and I didn't expect that a child that had so much promise and such a community that is so connected and so deliberate in its relationship building, that we could lose our children to gun violence. But then when I started studying those different causes around that, the intersections of housing and education and just food and our health system, I realized that we needed stronger voices in our community that actually were engaged with the policymakers to a level of influence, and not just to have the buy-in of equity or to say that we're inclusive or we're promoting diversity, but to actually be taking what is being experienced and what is being shared to define policy, to dismantle the systems that our state is known for. And so doing this right now, running for office is just a part of that whole evolution of my activism, because of gun violence, and then because of police brutality and mass incarceration. I believe that the city of Portland is a pivotal place in our state. We have a lot of opportunity to build what real diversity should be in the state of Oregon. And I want to utilize my experience and my relationships to build what that looks like, and to build a sound and effective system of government right here in the city of Portland that does not exploit people for political or financial gain, but actually invest in communities so that we all have that privilege of the American dream. And so I'm running on those morals of accountability and transparency, and I believe that we can get there.
That's amazing. I want to thank the candidates again for being willing to share a little bit more about themselves and why they're running and what work they do. So now we're going to transition into a bit of questions that deal with topics from the federal level all the way to the state and local level. First of all, COVID-19 has impacted all of us, but it seems to disproportionately impact Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. What does this say about our government and our leadership? And I'd like to let Representative Lawrence start first.
Hi, Asukulu. I'm just also going to take this moment to tell you that my name is Lawrence Spence. So I would appreciate if you use the whole thing. Thank you so much. But, part of what is happening, that the results that we're seeing across the nation of African Americans being overrepresented in COVID-19 deaths is a direct and deliberate result of divestment from Black communities. We lack the resources that keep our healthcare institutions underfunded. We're also already have a prevalence of the pre-existing conditions that make a COVID-19 infection more severe. We have a a higher rate of heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, asthma, and cancer. And those things are due to, living near environmentally unsound, brownfields and environmentally unsound neighborhoods with higher pollution and things like that. We know that our healthcare system does not understand or take Black pain and Black discomfort seriously. I am originally from New York. Portland is my chosen home. I've lived here for almost 7 years. And a friend of mine passed away on Monday due to COVID-19 because he was turned away from a hospital when he came in with critical conditions, when they cited that he wasn't critical. And he already had asthma and diabetes, which are two of the most dominant factors in having a severe and fatal encounter with COVID-19. And so when we think about how often this happens, when we think about the fact that we already know that the Black maternal mortality rate is higher, regardless of socioeconomic status, we know that there are issues here that are pre-COVID-19. There are systemic issues here that will always stem and come from the fact that we live in lower income areas and we have less access to healthcare services. And the quality of the institutions in our communities are lacking because they're underfunded, understaffed, and overworked. And so this leads to a higher or prevalence of fatalities. And at the end of the day, African-American workers are frontline workers. We make up a large percentage of CNAs, LPNs, the hospital cleaning staff, sanitation workers, TriMet workers, grocery store and people who work in childcare facilities. And so these are people who are less likely and less able to work from home. And so they are going to work every day and putting themselves and their families and our communities at higher risk. And so, when we have this overrepresentation in all of the variables that make a bout with COVID-19 more fatal, nobody should be surprised by the results.
No, I agree with you. I mean, first of all, I wanted to just note, look at our panel here. First of all, thank you all for being here. We live in one of the whitest large cities in the country. But that does not mean we do not exist. We are here, present here and around the country. One of the things that I want to highlight before I get to answering your question is that we have a census that's going on right now. And I understand there is a great suspicion, especially within Black and brown communities when it comes to, counting up surveys, whatever, for the government. But we need you to go ahead and complete those surveys, complete the census. It is vitally important that we combat the undercounting of Black and brown communities. It affects what kind of resources come in and what kind of resources go out. Typically speaking, when we look at the census every decade, white folks are overcounted, and then we can go down the color lines, and the darker you are, the less likely you're going to have a true count. You're going to be undercounted. We need to make sure that we get the resources where they belong. One good example is here in the 3rd district. After 10 years of population growth, we probably have significantly less representation than, say, the 2nd district, which is a very rural area because of the growth of people coming into the 3rd district from all over the country, and it just being a highly urbanized area. So that was my aside. Please do complete your census. We need to make sure that everyone is counted, that we count here in Oregon and we count across the country. Next, Akasha's right. We have a system of institutional and structural racism that has impacted and has really impacted Black folks more, Black and Indigenous folks more than any other group. When we look at the COVID crisis, I know that the numbers are starting to slowly come out. We have in Michigan where Black folks represent about 14% of the state, representing a good 40% of the COVID cases. In Louisiana, I think the representation is somewhere in 30% range, but 70% of the COVID cases. When I was growing up in St. Louis, I spent half my time in Kinloch. Kinloch was a brownfield area. It was one of the first places that Black folks were allowed to buy outside of the city itself. It was rife with environmental pollution. It was right next to the airport. It was a place that people to this very day continue to dump. And that is where you get higher incidence of asthma. That is where you get higher incidence of a lot of different diseases that are based off of environmental issues. But on top of that, like Akasha was saying as well, our Black communities and our brown communities are the ones that are the frontline workers, that are the low paid workers that don't have the benefits and don't have the ability to work from home, and so are going to be facing higher outcomes when it comes to being in front of this disease, having more risk of being able to catch this. And then when it's time to get healing, as Akasha noted with her friend, we are disregarded, and that comes from implicit bias. It comes from institutional and structural racism. From the pain management side, oh, you don't need it because Black folks apparently can sustain more pain or something. But bottom line, it comes to the point where you got to be truthful and be honest about it. Black folks aren't regarded to the same level as dominant culture. And we got to change that. We have to have more voices in our government that are going to shape that. We're going to need people to call that out in public. And I know there's plenty of folks here on this panel that do that on a regular basis, but we also need to secure the power to ensure that everyone is taken care of. We need to have a government that's going to work for all of us and not just a few.
And in my opinion, what we're seeing, and I don't need to restate what was already stated, but what we're seeing is that our country feels like we're dispensable people. When we talk about the amount of people that are dying from this and the exposure of people of color, and especially Black people, we're having to go to work. I remember in the beginning, that first Friday when the shutdown was announced, and I remember going to stores and even that weekend grabbing things for elders in our community that were housed in that didn't even know that there was anything going, because I'm telling them, hey, I'm bringing you toilet paper and stuff. They're like, girl, we got what we need. And I'm like, no, you might not, because when you go to the store in a couple of days, there's not going to be anything there. But they were fully unaware. And then even the people at the stores were like, yeah, this stuff is really nothing. And I said, well, I can't believe that you're here and they don't have you wrapped up. And they were like, well, they're telling us this nothing. And I'm like, that's not okay. That's not okay, because you're serving me right now. You're here in this line and you're dealing with everybody and all of our anxiety, all of our attitudes, all of our trauma. None of us know who's sick, what sick looks like. And you're here serving us in the grocery store, dealing with shopping carts, crying babies, food. You're handling everything. And your business model is telling you that there's no problem. At the same time, it's telling us to stay in our houses. So there's a misrepresented information. We're being misinformed to the point of it being to the detriment of our safety. And when people have already been historically abused by policies and systems and the people that lead us, it's hard to regain that trust. And even if it's worth your life, even if it's at the detriment of your life, you have people now, like you were just giving us the information about the census, but people are saying, look what happened. It started right when the census is due. And I'm like, oh no, like we're going to lose every opportunity that we have to really be engaged in process of civics to the point where we can trust it or we have some kind of handle on what political power looks like for us. But right now, people feel exploited. They feel like they are dispensable. And we're seeing that all over the country right now in mass incarceration here in Oregon. Lawsuits are happening already. And through our company, I have a nonprofit, Don't Shoot Portland. We started because we had to literally say that Black Lives Matter here in Portland for people to see that there were discrepancies in the word equity. We were talking about equity in our housing, but we had the most houseless children. We were talking about equity in our education system, but we had the most overrepresentation in our jail systems and in our foster care systems and in our housing and unhoused community. And they all look like the people on this show right now, but we don't have leaders that are actually in a position with the mandatory resources that we see happening right now, like all of these critical resources are coming to us from city to city to house people, to provide medical systems, to invest in our healthcare system so that we don't discriminate against people who don't pay. And we've been saying that those things were a necessity for generations. And so I'm just hoping that we're all taking notice of this, that we're being mindful to document the discrepancies, because when things get back to what we want to call a model America, we need to interrupt business as usual. And we need to hold these systems accountable to dispensing the same type of resources that they're dispensing now to our communities. Because right now, what I'm seeing as far as the amount of people that are dying in incarcerated systems, our disability community being left at the door, we're burying people that are valuable to society, but because they're not able to have the same accessibility as the rest of us, they're losing. And there's not a lot of time or energy that people like myself can put forth to help right now, besides running for office. So it's pretty much a mandate. How do we want to come out of this? You know, when the primaries happen this, you know, right before the summer, and everybody has an opportunity to cast their vote, they have to really be thinking about who's going to deliver us, who do we get to work with to manufacture some equity through this process of what's happening right now, because we're literally in a pandemic. And myself, if I didn't trust the leadership we have in our city, if I didn't feel that it was ineffective before coronavirus, I definitely don't feel that it's going to be a corrective or a connected system that's going to help us. So thank you for asking that question.
I think that's an important place to switch gears around who's going to have the conversation and hold people accountable. Within Portland, we see a large mobilization of youth voice throughout issues from climate change to racial justice. How will you continue to support and uplift youth voices within your work? And then I want to start with Teressa.
Thank you for asking me that. One of the reasons I started Don't Shoot Portland was it was in response to not only the death of my nephew, but the death of Mike Brown from Ferguson, Missouri. And what I realized when I heard his mother on TV talking about, he, you know, would tell her, "Mom, why do I got to go to school? They're going to kill me anyway." When she said he knew he was going to die, I had heard that before. I had heard so many parents saying that, and I didn't understand how activism or community engagement could change it. But there was an immediate uprising. And what that did was it built a communication system for communities all across the country, like ours, that needed some kind of effort of support to educate us on what this process meant and how to utilize it. And when I saw that manifesting itself, the most important thing that I could figure was that we had to indoctrinate our children, because I didn't want it to take a tragedy for them to become politically engaged. I wanted it to be usual and customary, right? I wanted it to be like 50, 60 years ago when the children were on the front line with Dr. King and they actually knew what they were petitioning for. I wanted to, you know, kind of create a bureaucratic system in our communities where we leveraged our political power to actually have our voices heard and to be able to hold our leaders accountable. And I only see that happening if we support children and youth in having access to the civic process, making sure that everything is engineered in that focus. I started using art and legal systems in order to accommodate that interest, because I was thinking, like, how do you get kids to be political? So I started challenging myself through, you know, the innovation of arts, and through that creativity, sharing history with them, and also showing them the system of justice and how they could interpret that. And it just, I mean, we have to do more of that. I think that when they started taking government out of schools that were impoverished or in low economic communities, that was intentional, because if you don't understand the rule of law, if you don't understand the application of systems, then you're not going to be a worthy participant. But we have to make it usual and customary. And I think that it does start with the youth. And I've already dedicated my life to that. And I'll die doing the work that I'm doing now. The reason I'm running is because I have 2 grandchildren now, and they're both boys. I don't want them to grow up in the society that we're in right now, wondering if they go to the park, if they're going to come home safe, you know, or wondering if their education is already an investment for that city that they live in, or if the investment is actually in a jail. You know, we need to be able to make those decisions for our community. And right now, we're not the ones making them. It's going to be you, though. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it did. Next, I want to transition to Albert to see his thoughts on this.
Yes, thank you. So, when we look at who leads our government, when you look at who has the power within politics, it tends to skew white and it tends to skew older. Right now, when we look at our members of Congress, a vast majority of them are well beyond 60 years old. Most of them are 60s and 70s, and some in their 80s and even 90s. We have career politicians that have been in office for 20, 30, and 40 years. Now, the crises, the issues that we face are issues that impact the youth more than they will impact our older folks. When we talk about a climate emergency, it is the youth that are going to be impacted the most. We've had youth who have tried to battle in court to say that we must protect the rights of the children in the future over the needs or the wants and the desires of the people of the present. We need to do everything we can to uplift the voices of the youth. And for me, in my campaign, the majority of our staff are the youth, 20s and teens. We're trying to uplift these voices. We're trying to encourage and embolden these voices because the future is for them. The future, one of the reasons why I'm making this run is I've got a 6-year-old daughter who needs a planet to live on, a stable country and government to live in, and a life worth living. If we're going to address and attack these issues, they're gonna come with the voices of the youth. And so we're doing everything we can to uplift those voices. And when I'm in Congress, here's one of the things that I really want to do. We take a look at the folks when I lived in DC and I worked near Capitol Hill. Oftentimes I would see who came out of the system for the congressional pages and the congressional interns, and they typically were from the 1%. They were typically super wealthy sons and daughters of super wealthy who had connections with the representatives. I want to change that whole perspective and that dynamic, and I want to make sure that we're bringing in folks and encouraging kids from marginalized communities, encouraging kids that aren't coming from silver spoon backgrounds to have an opportunity to be engaged in our government, to be engaged and to have that ability to understand what it is and what that environment entails. I want to make sure that it's just not an area that we continue to provide as a privilege to the very few. We need to make sure that we have a government that works for all of us. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have citizens that are engaged. We need to have youth engaged. We need to make sure that we have an education system that is truly equal, that is truly providing education resources that are going to be beneficial for all and not just those, again, at the very top.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to get Akasha's input.
Thank you. Part of what Albert talked about in the first answer was the reality of the census, right? And what the census does when we count now, it's the roadmap for the plans that are made for the next 20 to 30 years into the future, right? It's how people start to make those large decisions as to whether you start to build a new school or you build a new prison or whatever those plans are. The census is what makes that decision, right? And so, like Albert was saying, it's how can we have people in power who are not going to be here in the next 20 and 30 years, right? Their needs are different. What they want to advocate for is right now, is the present. And so part of what I think is very important to do is to increase civic engagement and transparency and visibility is by helping to support the initiative to lower the voting age. When we create habits of civic engagement, when we're, like Teresa said, introducing it in high school, you're allowing people who are 16 years old, who are on the front lines, right? Who is on the front lines of the environmental justice marches right now? It's young people, it's the youth. They're stepping out of school saying, we want a future, you owe this to us, right? And so if we give them that ability, we don't disillusion them that the process is not for them, that their voices are not able to be heard, right? We give them the ability to truly participate in their democracy. You give them that muscle that they learn how to flex, and you're not going to have this kind of lack of voter participation that happened in 2016, right? Where people stay home. You won't have it where people aren't primary voters. And so you have these big upsets where people who shouldn't have won primaries win, right? We need to encourage and to maintain youth advocacy and youth voices while they are upset, right? While they are ready to learn how to, again,
Oh, they're fired up, right?
while they're truly fired up, you know, before you get to that 18, between 18 and 35 or 45 or 65 when they don't vote. Because as somebody, as you guys know, I'm not running for office, but as you guys know, what are the demographics of people who you're supposed to target? Who is the most consistent voting bloc? People over 65. Right? And that's because they want to make sure their Medicare is taken care of. They want to make sure they have access to prescription drugs, cheaper or generic drugs. They want to make sure they're fighting for their rights. The people that I see at the Capitol more often than anybody else are people who are retired, people who have time. So if we don't do things like make an election day a federal holiday where everybody has a day off, if we don't, again, decrease the voting age so that it becomes habitual, it becomes something that you do, right? If we don't also increase pay. One of the things that, you know, on the local level, yes, on our city council and metro, you get paid a decent wage, but in our legislature, you don't. And it is an extreme barrier for entry for people of color. You have people who have entered this space and want to stay there, but it's unsustainable. You cannot raise a family on $30,000 a year. You cannot do it. And I'm young, I'm only 31 years old. I have an ability to do it because I own my own business. And so I have a little bit more flexibility. But if you work for somebody, as people in their early 30s tend to do, as people in their early and late 20s tend to do, you do not have an ability to step up and to represent your community. It is such a barrier, especially for people of color.
Absolutely.
You know, you've done all this work, you've went to university, you've gotten all these student loans now. And so how are you expected to provide for yourself, make a living wage, pay off those loans, have a family, and do all of that and try to represent your community in these places where we need to have true disruption if you don't pay people a living wage? So, you know, it's all of these things that create more civic engagement, create the transparency and visibility and the action that we need to see. Because as Teresa said, you know, the only time that we move the needle on anything that we want to see in our nation, in our government, is when we have on the ground action from people for whom these changes are not anecdotal, for whom you don't walk away from the fight, for whom this is life or death, and who are gonna fight continuously to make these changes. So again, you know, having youth be able to engage in politics in every level, as a civic activist and the grassroots level, but then again, as an elected official, is so important.
Yeah, I think voting is particularly important, and I think that's a great transition to our next question. With the suspension of the Bernie Sanders campaign, a lot of young people in communities of color are grieving the loss of a progressive voice in the race. How do you encourage these communities to turn out for candidates that they may not 100% support?
I think Albert should take that question first.
Yes. Okay, I will, because you know I'm the burner of all the group here. Yeah. So you know, in 2015, Bernie Sanders was the one that inspired me to become more engaged. He was the first candidate that I ever contributed to, first politician I ever gave money to, because before that, I looked at politicians as liars, crooks, and thieves. Yeah. He was the first candidate that I ever knocked on doors for, never phone banked for, and you know, in 2016, when the primary was taken from him, my wife and I, we kind of looked at each other. We were like, well, what's next? You know, our candidate lost, and we listened to what he said, and it was not me, us. We need to become more engaged civically, politically, and that's exactly what we've done. You know, from that 2015 time period, jumped into politics, got into becoming a precinct committee person with the Democratic Party, state central committee delegate, joined the Portland chapter of the Democratic Socialist of America, and then got involved with a lot of different civic organizations. Got appointed to the city council's Citizens Review Committee that does police oversight actions. Found out that wasn't exactly what that was all about, but tried earnestly to see if that was going to do something. Got involved with TriMet's Transit Equity Advisory Committee to look at what kind of disparate impacts were affecting marginalized communities with the decisions that were being made at TriMet. Got involved with the Giving Tree, which works with folks in low-income housing downtown, and the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. Got involved with an NAACP, a lot of different organizations, kind of stretched out all over the place because really it just felt like becoming more involved with the community. Now, how do you get folks to keep fired up like that? I think we listen to what Bernie said, which is the same mantra, not me, us. We all need to be engaged. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to run for office, no, but it does mean that some of us do, and not just any office, but all offices, all levels of government. If we want to see the changes, we need to be at the table, be it youth, be it people of color, all of us, we need to stand up. And I know it's daunting and it takes a lot of courage to do this. You've got to stand up, you got to rise up. And if you're not doing that, you need to be active within organizations that are doing something. I think that what we have seen in the last 5 or 6 years has been an uprising of people becoming more engaged because they're realizing what politics is all about, which is who gets what and how, right? They're seeing that what is happening is we are becoming more and more disenfranchised. Folks at the very top continue to take more and more. We just saw that the last couple of weeks with this crisis. Within a matter of days, trillions of dollars were just injected into Wall Street to save the assets of the 1%, without discussion, without deliberation. But then when it came time to talk about how we're going to bail out the people, that took lots of time to deliberate over. And during that deliberation, another $500 billion was snuck in so that corporations could have money for no strings attached. Meanwhile, we're still waiting on, maybe getting $1,200 at some point in May, maybe, if you qualify, if you have the right credentials, if you, filled out your taxes the right way last year. And that $1,200 is not going to do anything to help the people. We need to have an emergency economic support of at least $2,000 per person per month until this crisis is over. Yet this is a repetition of 2008 with the financial crisis, where we bailed out the people who actually caused the problem, Bear Stearns, and gave them bailouts. We gave bailouts to automotive industry. We gave out bailouts to all these big corporations. But when it came time to bailing out small businesses, when it came time to bailing out homeowners and renters, we're like, it's on you. So in order to stop that, in order to change that whole dynamic, you got to look at who's in office. And right now, we've got an oligarchy of super wealthy folks that are ruling over us, seriously, ruling over us, instead of citizen representatives who know the struggle, who won't take the corporate contributions, and who are going to truly fight for the regular everyday folks that need the relief. So if you want to see that happen, if you want to do something, you got to be part of it. You cannot become disengaged. Like I said, politics might not be for you, but activism could be. Organizations, there are so many good organizations out there that are fighting the good fight. And regardless of what your interest is, there is an organization out there that you can help support. But I think that we need to team up. We need to join forces because we're the 99%, and we're fighting against a 1% that is not concerned, that doesn't have any concern for us.
And I just wanted to say, back in 2015, Bernie Sanders' campaign had gotten in contact with my organization, Don't Shoot Portland. And this was when it was still just a grassroots movement. It wasn't a nonprofit at the time. I don't think I even set up an account with the Secretary of State at the time. I think I was just like, whoa, people want me to help them organize around political activism. And this is helping me get more people back and forth to Salem and, to City Hall and different things. So it was a part of what I needed to do. But he had put his people in contact with us on the anniversary of Mike Brown's murder. And he was due to come to Portland. And I guess at the time they were going to put him at the Memorial Coliseum, but there was such an outpouring of support for him that people, you know, they moved it to the Moda Center. And it was the same weekend that he was in Seattle when some protesters actually went up and he moved and gave them the microphone and gave them an opportunity to speak out on what they were speaking out on. And it was Black Lives Matter activists in Seattle, Washington. So he came here, you know, I'm doing some community organizing around this kid that got murdered, and I'm doing it at the Apano space at the time, right there on 82nd. And I had got a permit. I had been doing all this different work the whole weekend with sponsors like YWCA, ACLU, the Oregon Assembly of Black Affairs, Oregon Humanities was doing all the audio. And like I said, Bernie Sanders people were like at all 3 days of the events, right? And so we're doing a little rally outside the space where I paid the fire marshal for a noise permit, knowing that I just had children and a lot of people with disabilities this day. We're honoring Mike Brown. And I get arrested, right, for doing this little rally. And the thing is that Bernie Sanders met with members of my organization. He met with young Black children from Portland. He met with labor movement organizers from Portland. He sat with them for probably an hour or two while I was locked up, and even sent out a tweet. So by the time I got out of jail, because they arrested me at this little event, but by the time I got out of jail, I was trending on Twitter, and he was like, "Our prayers are with you, Teressa." And at that point, I was like, dang, you know, that's cool. Because I was already like, why do you want to come to our events and why do you want to be there? But I had saw what was going on with like Erica Gardner and, you know, different families across the country. And we all were connected because, you know, we're all in solidarity and helping support each other's uprising, which was more about strategy and political policy and how to access it than just making a protest. The protests were to make the news media pay attention to our petitioning. But when I saw that he had that type of concern, where, you know, up until the time it was time for him to go out on that plane, sticking with my people and making sure they didn't, you know, take a bridge to get me out, and then checking back in contact with us, I knew that that was somebody different because I'm an activist. I'm somebody's auntie whose nephew got killed in gun violence. What does the, you know, this person running for president need to be contacting me for, or caring about me being in jail for protesting? So I think we have gained an opportunity through his determination in building community and branching that network to support people. I think that concern is contagious, because if people never had any concern before, they became concerned because of the unity, because of solidarity, because of the uprisings and the need for supporting community and building community. And so the fact that we're all in this political realm, we're here. You know, it's not over. The fact that he's gone ahead and timed out, that just means that the work is functioning for us to get to where we need to go to, because people should not disengage when they don't get what they want. They should move harder. They should move faster. Those same people that aren't supporting Bernie anymore, they need to be supporting your movement. They need to be supporting my movement. They need to be supporting, you know, Representative Akasha, Lawrence Spence in state of Oregon. You know, like they need to be supporting the same way they were determined to get him in. I've seen a lot of references to him and the civil rights movement. What people need to realize, and what I'm seeing on the media, is that there are people that totally want to disengage. And I'm like, if you literally felt that there was a priority to look out for your fellow man and to be this civil rights engineering system to support this person who had lived on those values, then you can't walk away and allow Trump to become our president again. You can't walk away and let him feel like he's that big, you know? You have to support the people on the ground that are doing the work. You know, we need you. Because whatever is going to be happening locally in our own communities, we're going to have to deal with whoever is in the White House. And we need to have people that care about people, period.
I'll just say one thing briefly to that. I completely agree. And, you know, one of the things that Trump coming into the presidency did was motivate a lot of people to get active, right? Yeah. People who would have otherwise turned a blind eye to the issues that we talked about with why there's such a prevalence in the Black community with COVID-19, or why with COVID-19 fatality, and why there's such an issue on the ground with, you know, for economic justice, for environmental justice, et cetera. You know, you have to keep that same energy, right? We have to ensure that, you know, this one person is not the movement. We are the movement, right? And so if we know that and we understand that and we know that we're not fighting for this person, we're fighting for values, we're fighting to have our actions match our values, then you can't step aside and become apathetic. You have to keep fighting.
Yeah, I think that's an important note. Transitioning back to the COVID-19 global pandemic, we got a question about what elective officials need to do for incarcerated people and what measures they should take to preserve their humanity and to stop the spread of the virus in jails and prisons locally and then on a national level as well.
I guess I'll start with that. One of the things that we've been asking, the legislature, we can't do much until we get called back into a special session, right? But what we have been doing is putting pressure on those who can act right now and to commute sentences for people who are vulnerable populations in the prison system. So you have people who are over the age of 65 who have, again, those pre-existing conditions. Their sentences can be commuted and they can be released back to the community under community supervision. There are also people who are slated, around 400 people who are incarcerated right now who per month who are slated to be released in 2020. And so if we have the commutation of their sentences where they get to be released earlier and into community supervision, then we're able to decrease that risk. Because one of the things that we know is that the prison population deals with pandemics on a regular basis. They're in such tight quarters that if one person gets sick, if a CO comes in with a flu, or a stomach flu or influenza or something, they put the entire prison population at risk. And so, they're in such tight quarters that we need to ensure that their safety. They are still Oregonians. They still deserve every right and protection that we have, who are not under supervision. And we know that a large part of the population who is incarcerated is African American, is Latin American, is a person of color, right? A Native person or such. So we need to ensure that their rights are maintained and that we push for commutation of sentences and get those vulnerable people out of the prison system and back into the community.
Yeah, so 100% agree with Akasha on all those levels. I just want to take a step further back on the issue and just say that, when we look at our complete criminal justice system, you've got to look at the structural and institutional racism that put it in place. You've got to look at the war on drugs initiated by the Nixon administration. You've got to look at how, what the purpose of the whole system is. Generally speaking, I think that she's right. We need to expedite commutations, but we need to really address and take a look at our entire criminal justice system in total, and not just during this crisis, but in total, and move toward a prison abolition. Because quite frankly, a good majority of the folks that are in prison for low-level drug crimes, that are in prison that really need help with mental health issues and some other issues, and they shouldn't be incarcerated. I think that there is a lot of discussion and a lot of talk, hell, even from my law school, criminal justice professor Overton used to be a prosecutor, Black lawyer. He's switched over to now talking about prison abolition and understanding just how tragic and how destructive our system has been, not only on the individuals, but all of the folks that are within their networks.
Absolutely. And the thing is that we've seen the investment in dealing with the health issues. And when we talk about criminal justice and we talk about how people with disabilities have been overrepresented, and especially when they're people of color, we see what happens when you put those resources directly into those communities. We see what happens when you want to fast track housing. And I'm sorry that COVID had to bring forth, the momentum for us to go ahead and invest in housing and dealing with our health system. But we have to look at how fast that was engaged. to make sure that we supported our economy instead of the lives of people. And we have to look at that, and we have to use that in order to manage what you're talking about in regards to delivering the abolition, blueprint for building out care, not cops, and different things of that sort. And so we're on the right track because we're seeing that these resources are available, and we know that criminal justice is in the top part of the underlying issues of the root causes of, domestic violence, community violence, hunger, houselessness, and really our emotional and mental health when we're discriminated against as children and become adults with that same fear or trauma inflicted on us in society. I mean, it's a hamster wheel, but we are learning how fast those resources come into play when we say that there is a pandemic. And I was watching something on the internet the other day, and y'all probably know, but somebody said poverty is a pandemic, and it is. And if we keep looking at how do we dissolve our criminal justice system to evolve it into something that is more supportive for communities, then we will look at it as it's a pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the global pandemic has brought to light a lot of inequalities and injustices that people haven't cared about before. So closing out, I really want to thank our three amazing panelists today for joining us for this virtual town hall. And so I want to give each person just some time to wrap up, about 2 minutes to wrap up and to say some closing thoughts. We can start with Teressa.
Thank you. So thank you, Asukulu, again for having me. It's an honor to be here with everybody. We're in very good company. I just wanted to let everybody know, if you would like to learn more about my campaign, there's a people's platform at Teressa Raiford for Mayor.com. And also we have a petition, what Albert said about, the money, the stimulus, it needs to be monthly, and it needs to be at least $2,000. Right now we have a petition that asks the city of Portland to make sure that every resident that's making $75,000 or less get $1,000 stimulus. And we're only asking for 1 month, but I think we have to renegotiate what those terms look like. So we updated our change.org petition to reflect that if we can get another 1,000 signatures, that we will update it to, to show $2,000 a month. Because this is something that we did not create. I'm a business owner. I have a company that's an essential organization in Northeast Portland. We provide legal services and direct advocacy to families that are in crisis. And the fact that we're not able to operate, and the fact that it's costing me money not to operate, and that I might have to get loans in order to sustain my business, that is not something that I engineered as someone in society, but we pay taxes and we have dividends for that. So I'm hoping that they'll look at that infrastructure and say, hey, people have already invested in a stimulus for in case something happens through our tax system. So we have to rightfully, reparate these issues. And so check that petition out. It's on my website, Teressa Raiford for Mayor.com. And also, if you would like to make a donation, that matters. It's hard right now, but you can go to Raiford2020.com. And thanks again, Albert, for having me.
Teressa. I'd like to invite Albert to add.
Yeah, just really quickly, if you want to see our platform, learn more about us, albertlee2020.com. Of course, we would love your contribution. 100% people powered. Thank you.
And again, thank you so much, Albert, for inviting me to join this. As people know, I'm a representative sitting right now. So if you have any other issues and you're in House District 36 or, just throughout the Portland area, please send us emails or questions and things like that. Our Facebook, our Instagram has a lot of resources and a lot of information to help you navigate through these uncharted times, and we're here to help. So again, thank you so much. And I appreciate being a part of this really auspicious panel.
Thank you. If you want to learn more about me and the Congo Peace Project, go to www.congopeaceproject.org. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Peace, y'all.